All right, it looks like we are at the top of the hour. Thanks so much for joining today. Our Garris Horn HIT webinar today is titled, Is the CFPB Coming After Your LO Comp Plan? First, some quick logistics for this HIT webinar. All participants will be on mute. If you would like to ask a question during the webinar, please type in the questions dialog box. Due to our shortened schedule, questions will be addressed individually after the webinar, and this webinar is being recorded. We are going to keep introductions very short so we can get right into the webinar. First, we have Raymond Snytsheuvel, our senior partner at Garris Horn. Ray focuses on federal and state regulation, specializing in making those operational in a lender's environment. And finally, we have our managing partner at Garris Horn, Troy Garris. Troy focuses on RESPA, LO Comp, fair lending, CFPB enforcement, and mergers and acquisitions. That's our panel for today. So I'm going to kick this over to Troy now for the webinar.
Thanks, Shauna. And I thank everybody for being here. Thanks especially to everyone who was able to join through the various platforms that we've sent this out through. And also a special thanks to Ray for you being here, Ray. I truly enjoy working with Ray, and we've known each other a long time. Our topic today is the CFPB coming after your LO Comp plan. I think the LO compensation concept has been out there percolating around for some time, and then there's been some recent developments. I'll skip through our pretty faces here, hopefully, and get right into the meat of this. LO Comp, I think, right now it's on fire for a lot of different reasons. It's on fire in the marketplace because a lot of people are out there trying to figure out ways in this very demanding and tough market, try to figure out ways to make LO compensation make sense. And then it's on fire, I think, also in the regulatory space because there have been some recent developments, which we'll talk about to some degree. And then there's some other ones kind of on the fringes too that haven't percolated up yet, at least officially, but that we'll want to focus on. And I want to, at the end here, what I want people to take away really is, one is that these slides will be sent out and you'll have this material ready for you to look at, but also that you should really be focused on these areas and going back and thinking through and thinking about your LO compensation plans. And in particular, I want you to focus on three areas if you think about nothing else when you leave here. One is the area of concessions. The second is the area of broker versus banker compensation. And the third is the area of 1099 compensation. And so we'll dive into all of that, as I mentioned. But let's talk about in this first slide here, what's going on and what's causing issues in the LO Comp world. What should you be thinking about, and what do you do next? What should you expect both from regulators and then also from the way that competitors will probably be addressing these issues or could expect to be addressing these issues. And to that end, Ray, feel free to jump in, of course, at any time and talk about some of this. I know you see a lot of different things going on in the world and come at it from a different angle, having your past experiences.
Yeah, I mean, having been in-house many years and dealing with lots of operations and dealing with things real time at my clients, former employers, yeah, you're going to see a lot of this, and a lot of questions come up. I will tell you, I think some of it, Troy, is coming up again because we're in a different market than we were 2 years ago. As particularly mortgage bankers, I see banks as well, credit unions, but particularly mortgage bankers are very innovative. So they have to pivot and find out what makes sense and value, and they start tinkering maybe or have thoughts about tinkering with compensation plans or relationships that they have with people out there. So the loan comp rule is being partially triggered again because of the innovation. That's how I look at it, and it should. I've never had a problem with innovation. So, but anyway, that's what I'm seeing, Troy. So, like you're saying, it's on fire. It's like, yeah, it's coming back again, I think. So, but yeah, let's go through some of this and see if we can give some guidance.
Yeah, and we're mostly going to focus today on the LO Comp rule itself, but I'll tell you, and everybody knows this probably anyways, that there are actually a lot of other rules that are relevant here. We'll talk about some towards the end, again, mostly focusing on LO Comp. But and I mentioned 1099s, which is really only partially an LO Comp rule issue, and a large part of it is really just compensation to loan officers and others. But let's talk about a few key definitions as we jump off. So there's always a question of who is a loan originator under the rules. So there are a couple of different interpretations, or a couple of different rules in place, rather, that people get a little confused because they conflate them. One is, what's a loan officer or loan originator under licensing laws? That's actually different from the LO Comp rule itself. The LO Comp rule is very broad and covers a lot of different types of activities. It covers people who take loan applications. It also covers people that are negotiating terms of loans. That's true in all states for licensing too, but it also covers people who arrange, facilitate. There's actually just a big array of people that are covered by the loan originator compensation rules. So that part's important. And then another part of this important is, what is compensation exactly? Again, written in a very broad manner. And we don't often think about this in terms of the day-to-day, but in fact, almost anything can be compensation. It's almost like a thing of value type of a RESPA type of a concept.
It's exactly what I was going to say. It's like a thing of value. Think about it. That's a very broad statement. And if we approach it here as well, a lot of people experience here with Section 8 as well, they get the idea of, instead of sitting back like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. Pretty broad. Okay. So, yep.
It could be trips. It could be, tickets to the movies. It could be really the way that it's written. It could be almost anything. And so you do got to take that into consideration. We're going to talk about the most recent statement that has sort of caught fire in the industry, and you've probably heard people talk about it. If not, you certainly will be soon. There was a recent statement in the CFPB's highlights that talks about how a particular company or companies, it's a little unclear, were paying people differently based on whether a loan was done in-house or whether it was done as a brokered loan. But it correlated also in that statement, which is pretty vague and pretty amorphous, and we're not quite sure yet what to make of it. It was also correlated to a loan product, which the CFPB has long said, a product is just a bundle of terms. And so if you pay differently based on product, then you're paying differently based on terms of loans. People can agree or disagree, but anyway, that's where that iteration came out just recently. And then another item that is really taken off out there recently is with the change in FHA, where FHA essentially seems to have taken off the handcuffs for the prohibition of doing dual capacity type services in FHA loans. That issue has sort of percolated through, and there are a lot of people out there that are currently either thinking about or have thought about and decided against, or are in the process of, or actually doing services where a single individual is both loan originator and also a real estate agent.
And real quick on that, Troy, and we can talk about it later because that's one of the rules that triggers, but other thing is the issue. But on that one, things that bubble up as well as the conflict issue, right? And how we handle that. And there's no perfect answer on that at a state level, but we'll talk about it later. But again, it goes back to innovation, right? I think getting innovation and getting new ideas of how to get business in the door, I think is a smart thing, but it's triggering certain things and lots of things we have to consider, a lot of it under loan comp.
And that's very true. And in fact, I've long made the argument, and regulators sometimes disagree, sometimes they agree, sometimes they just don't have the ability to make any changes. But I've long argued to HUD, for example, when it had this prohibition, I said, if a single person, one person, can do both roles and serve perhaps even in a better capacity than having two different people with two different roles and two different types of information and two phone calls needed for every aspect of the transaction, why would you restrict the way that business works? And so again, HUD seems to, it's not entirely clear, but HUD seems to have taken out the handcuffs in that regard with regard to FHA loans. So that could be in fact a really novel and good innovative technique that people have fallen upon, but there are going to be some risks there, and people don't quite know where the regulators are going to come out on it. And it's, so there are also state issues there too.
Yep.
So let's talk about what's actually prohibited here. And this, I'm doing a gloss on this because, you know, most of the people on the phone here, or on the call rather, they know the LO Comp rule, or at least deal with it from time to time. And so we'll just go just briefly in this little refresher to talk about what's prohibited. So the basic rule is can't pay based on terms of a loan, one or more loans, in fact, whether they're the loans of a single individual or multiple loan originators. You can't pay differently based on terms of loans. And similarly, you can't pay based on proxies for terms of loans. And there's a little test that the rule has built in to determine whether something is a proxy.
I don't think it's, I think it's, you're right, it's a little rule with broad implications and not always clear understanding. So, but yeah, you're right, small rule that can do damage.
That's very true. And that's the part where most people spend most of their time these days anyways, is just the question of whether you're paying based on terms or proxies. There's a whole other side, a half maybe, of the rule in terms of numbers of words, not necessarily the implications for day to day. But the other side of the rule is that you also cannot be paid both by a customer or a consumer and also by some other person. And the basic idea underlying that was, in the old days, so pre-LO Comp rule, there was concern that people, the loan originators, a lot of times brokers, but also loan originators in-house, would be paid really on two sides of the equation, and consumers didn't really understand that. So the Dodd-Frank rule said, look, you can be paid by somebody else, or you can be paid by the consumer, but not both. And that becomes implicated in this dual capacity type of a scenario that people have started to talk about more recently. So that's some of the things that are prohibited. A few others are product types. So what are product types? But the CFPB, like I mentioned, says that products are a bundle of terms, and so a question of what are products. People get tripped up sometimes on loan size because they think, well, I can pay for loans based on loan amount, which is true as long as it's a flat, non-varying amount, regardless of loan size. So in other words, if I pay 100 bips a loan and it's a big loan or a small loan, the amount of my LO's paycheck will differ, but I can't pay one amount for $100,000 loans, a different amount for $200,000 loans, and so on. So that's what that's getting to. And then they talk also about profit and some do good programs. But Ray, why don't you jump in there and talk about some of these?
Well, I mean, and that's the issue, right? I mean, and having been inside, and I think a lot of people, including on this webinar, on the operational side, have to deal with this. And it sounds simple enough, particularly in the law, just can't be in the terms and it can't be a proxy. But we get really smart questions when you start talking to people in the business themselves. And they say, well, for example, initially, there were questions as to whether FHA was a different program or not, right? And I think it made clarity sense, but, can you pay different on FHA loan? Well, no, not really. They'll be based on good points of, well, you don't understand, we don't make as much on these loans, so we can't pay the loan officer as much. Like, makes total good business sense. It's illegal, but it makes total business sense as to why you want to do that. So dealing with these, whether it's loan size or profitability, as we know, for the most part, this is really more of almost an anti-profit kind of, anti-steering, anti-profit kind of law. Okay, we know that. But these are the types of things that we deal with. The ones, and I like what you have here, the do good programs, right? No good deed goes unpunished. So maybe you have some kind of a program. Can you pay differently? I think we'd have to discuss some of those, but the way the counterintuitive answer would be no, you can't, because that's the intuition within in LO Comp rule, because it's counterintuitive. So there's a lot of things you have to go through that really make good sense insofar as the adjustments you want to make to LO Comp that might trigger one of these and might be unintentional. It's not meant for the reason. It makes good business sense. But these are the challenges that we're met with, and we still are kind of stuck with, yeah, I understand that, but the effect is this, and therefore it's a problem. So at the end of the day, there might be some, I don't want to say gray areas, but maybe they haven't spoken on some of these, a CFPB or otherwise. So you start taking some of the risk management in place and start assuming some of the risk or understanding it enough that you say, well, I think I can assume the risk. Maybe it's only got 4 loans, whatever it is, right? Ever. What do we do about it? So there might be situations, okay, fine. This is when risk management comes into play. But anyway, you're right, Troy, that's kind of what I've seen. And I think that's where, again, a lot of these people in this webinar are probably, hoping to get some clear answers on these, and we'll give as clear as we can, but some of them are, it depends. Let's talk it through.
And I will say too that the it depends is definitely going to be the walk away as far as the answer goes, because there is a lot of gray area. But I will also say that the CFPB and other regulators, their jobs are difficult, and we often hear, of course, that they don't understand the business and they don't understand business generally, and all that's probably true, at least to some degree. But also, they don't know what they don't know sometimes. And so they come in and they see something, and if it's an easy violation, they see something that's just it's flat out wrong or close to flat out wrong, and you don't have a good explanation as to why it is actually okay because of whatever nuance and finesse that you have thought through and analyzed and so on, then that's the red meat for the regulators, because a lot of times it's not really the difficult items that they're going after. It's a lot of times, at least as they describe in their consent orders and other settlements and the like, it's really pretty easy to spot violations that they're finding. And I always tell people, you're only hearing one side of the story when you read.
Exactly.
For example, the CFPB's consent orders. You're hearing the CFPB side of the story.
Well, and on that, let me digress on that real quick. And I think I told the client yesterday, on those things, the CFPB controls the narrative 100%. So I'm not saying they're lying or wrong or anything else. All I know is I don't know everything when we get some of these, and we still have to abide by these consent orders or whatever their narrative is, or whatever they're issuing. So it is a challenge. So Troy, why don't we take a look at some traditional stuff that we get questions on, or we see, and kind of some of it, yeah, sure, and and in fact, I know this because other people know it too, but when you get a bunch of compliance lawyers and compliance officers in a room, we talk about these things. Some of these, you're not all going to get the same answer, because we're all kind of working it out ourselves and assuming maybe some of the risk, whether you know it or not. So some of them like, of course, and others are like, well, why and how, and why not apply it here? It's great fodder for compliance conversations, to be honest with you. I know it's kind of nerdy to think that, but I'm a compliance nerd. Sorry, go ahead, Troy.
No, that's good. So yeah, so these are some of the things. Now there's a longer list, but there are some of the things that are allowed, specifically listed in the rule, that you can think about in terms of how you can put together your plan. So one is a flat non-varying amount. So my example a few minutes ago, 100 bips per loan amount. That seems, first of all, that's okay. But second of all, it's okay if you apply it consistently throughout the different programs. And actually, one of these items we're going to talk about, this broker versus banker concept, comes from the reading between the lines. I think it comes from the concept of paying a flat non-varying amount for one batch of loans versus another batch of loans. Not really. I would disagree with the CFPB in the way that they've described it, but we don't have much other than just a very.
Yeah, we don't have much to go on in this narrative, which is all we get is a blurb. I agree with you. So it's hard to really read that much into it, but it's news to us.
Right. And it's news that, again, people should, just like Director Cordray said a long time ago, that you should take this information. Despite their denials that they do it a lot of times, they have to, in the current environment, they have to put out these consent orders and have people understand kind of what they're doing and what they take offense to by reading the tea leaves in these consent orders, and agree with them or disagree with them as to how they do it. That is what they do. And Director Cordray said a long time ago, if you're not reading those consent orders, you're not getting the message, and you should be. Now this iteration just recently was not, in fact, in a consent order. It was the summary of the highlights, the examination process, not the enforcement process. But I do think that if it's not in enforcement already, it's at least some information that should make people think, they are looking at this broker versus banker or in-house compensation issue. Maybe I should be thinking about that and making sure that I've got my system set up in a way that I'm comfortable with the risk there, for better and worse, and interpreting how you want to. We don't have to go through all of these, but these are some different ways that specifically the CFPB has said that in its rule that you can do some of these types of pay differently based on these different types of characters or factors and be okay.
Yeah, and I think there might be a theme here, Troy, and again, with innovation, lots of questions and fact patterns can change things here, right? But I think, a lot of what we look at is that they're looking at steering, I think, in a sense, right? I mean, I think that's one of the underlying themes. Oddly enough, if you read the rule, and correct me if I'm wrong, Troy, steering is not an element. In other words, they're not testing you if you steer alone, and then because the implication, again, I've heard this being in-house, people are like, but we're not steering them. It doesn't matter. The effect might be, or the optics are that you're steering them because this product will get them, it can yield the loan officer more money. That's the implication, right? And the fact that they might make less money, and steer it that way is not relevant. So, but I think a lot of it, what they're looking is there a steering element here? And for example, on purchase versus refi, I'm just guessing here, you tell me, Troy, that's something at the end of the day, it's like, it's really hard pressed to find a situation that someone comes to you and you convince them to get a refi instead of a purchase, right? It's they're coming to you for a purchase or refi. And while I might be slick and say I can maybe argue that I can have a guy stay in his house because I can refinance him and I make more money that way, maybe, I suppose. But I think in the grand scheme of things, again, it's really kind of almost they're mutually exclusive situations, I submit. Not all of them will work that way. I'm just saying, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Troy, but that's kind of the theme, right? I mean, ultimately we look at the product too and the terms, and is that why we're doing it? Yes, okay. But really, if we look at the implication or the impetus for this, I believe it's a steering. And would you agree with that, Troy, to some degree? It helps in the analysis if that's accurate. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, and I do think that to some degree that's true. I do think also that the rule is slippery. And so there are ways that in one instance it may look or actually be okay to operate in a certain way, and there are other instances where what would seem to be fairly analogous, it wouldn't be okay. Right. And I think there's so little text in the actual rule, and there's so much text and conversation and informal kind of guidance that is out there, and even from the agency itself, that and not all of it can be harmonized easily, that it creates a lot of murky areas. So the purchase versus refi, as an example, is that a product? The CFPB has suggested that it's okay to pay. Well, they've suggested that it would not be necessarily steering or a proxy if an LO were paid differently versus on purchase versus refi. But if you try to harmonize that with, well, you can't pay differently based on product because it's a term of the loan itself, then what's the point of having that whole example if you can't pay for it differently because of terms in the first place? Like, don't even talk about it. Right. You never get to proxy. And so there is this undercurrent of ambiguity and unknowing area that really you just can't ever get a final answer to, unfortunately, until the agency comes out and says something more. So, I mean, it does leave everybody scratching their heads a little bit. And it is risk management. At the end of the day, it's risk management. And you do the best that you can with what you have as far as information. And you understand that you also got to run a business and you got to make decisions and then modify as you go along.
Yep. And let me clarify a point. When I say like the steering not an element, it's like it's not really defense. In other words, you can't say, well, I didn't steer them, or designs is know when people are going to steer them. That's not a defense in its own right. It's just by virtue. It's almost like strict liability, right? So just by virtue, it is implied that it's steering. So I think someone made a point, and I think it's a great point. But the point is that's what it's about. So that's what I believe to be the case.
Yeah, and you're exactly on point there, Ray. So let's jump to some of these items that are, so we've talked about historically what's been a problem, right? And the basic rule itself, don't pay based on terms, don't pay based on proxies on the one hand, and no dual compensation. In other words, get paid by both the consumer and somebody else on the other hand. And now let's figure out what the CFPB has been letting percolate around a little bit and what they seem to be focused on to some degree. So I mentioned the broker versus in-house scenario that came out. So there was a little blurb in these examination highlights that the CFPB puts out. And so one of the highlights said we were talking, it boiled down, it says we were talking to a company, one or more companies, and there was compensation that was being paid differently based on whether a loan was brokered out or a loan was originated in-house as the lender or the creditor. But then it goes on to say there was a difference in products of these two loans. So there were reverse loans that were being brokered out. Again, I'm reading into this, there's not enough text there, but we'll just say reverse loans being brokered out and forward loans being done in-house. It could have been much more complicated, it could have been lots of different scenarios, but that's the example that they gave. And then they said, well, paying differently based on product is in fact paying differently based on terms. And therefore, if you're brokering out for product, then there could be a violation. And so the companies corrected the way that they were doing their business going forward. Now, maybe that's the end of the story. Maybe that's the beginning of a conversation with enforcement. Maybe this is just the CFPB putting information out there saying, hey, we know a lot of companies around the country are doing this sort of thing. And we don't think it complies. And so be aware. If you think you need to make changes now. We don't quite know, right? But that's where this emanates from. And I will say that lots of companies that I'm aware of, that I talk to in the hallways and so on, and attorneys also. We'll be at Compliance and Risk Management Conference for MBA just coming up here, and lots of attorneys for lots of years have thought, there's some risk there. Again, it's risk management. There's some risk there. You have to really control how that system is operating. You have to really know that there is risk, and you have to be okay with it. And you also have to know that, the marketplace is what it is. And so, your book of business, you have to originate in a way that you think makes sense, and you can control those risks and be comfortable with them.
Troy, we have about 3 minutes left.
Ooh,
Oh,
okay.
go ahead.
Well, no, go ahead, Ray.
No, I was going to say one of the analysis on broker versus, and I talked to somebody in the industry, is that, but you might do less work on brokering than in-house, so why would you pay them the same? And the answer is, it's the rule. I can't really answer that question. It's more about, the rule override, for lack of a better phrase, fiscal logic sometimes.
I think also there's a risk that people will say, well, you know what, then if I can't pay differently brokered and in-house loans, I'll stop doing the brokered loans. I don't do much of them anyway. And too bad for the people who would have gotten a brokered loan from me, because the CFPB is telling me that I can't serve particular marketplaces because of that. And I think that's the unintended consequences of a statement like this, and whatever that means is what it means. It's unfortunate in that sense. Another area, we don't have enough time here. Another big area, I think, I mentioned concessions. So I'll go away from slides here for a second. So concessions is a big area. I hear, just like everybody on the call here probably hears, I hear that down the street, the companies are allowing the LOs to pay for concessions. I hear that all the time. I don't know if it's true. I think a lot of it is just kind of rumor and innuendo and misunderstanding what people are doing, but who knows? I will say that the CFPB has made pretty clear that its view is that having a loan originator bear the cost of concessions is not allowed. And so if people are being able to do that somehow, and sometimes it's probably not, it's not management being aware of it. It's some loan officers who've figured out ways to navigate around the system. That could be a problem. It could be
right. Like I said, and it might make fiscal sense, right? Yeah. Logically, they made, and there's some room in that in the rules where it's an unintended blah blah blah. But in the grand scheme of things, you don't do that, and so it might make fiscal sense. It's just illegal. And that's sometimes how we end up running.
And then, yeah, And then on the 1099 aspect, and again, remember concessions, banker versus broker, and 1099. That's what I want you to take away from this. Really, is on the 1099 issue. There has been over the past couple of years, or at least this past year, especially, a big number of questions that have come in where people are and talk in the hallways and right, where people are saying, "Hey, I want to pay my loan originators on a 1099 basis." And that way I get out of, having to pay payroll taxes and having to track them and, wage and hour rules and all kinds of different areas that I can get out of. And my licensing state will allow it, which I know that some states do, some states don't. I know, Ray, you do a lot of it.
I did a full analysis in every state, and I can tell you that's not the case. A lot of them will allow it, maybe even reluctantly, because it's quiet, silent on the law, but others will tell you no, even if it is, there's few that even in silent of the law, they're making it up a little bit. But anyway, the point is, yes, it is a state-by-state issue, and it's not every state allows it. It's not the case.
And I think also a big glaring question there on the 1099 issue is, if you're paying that way, then are you complying with all the other laws that
well, and let's do that. Let's flip if we can to talk about. Sorry, Troy, but if we can, we talk about concessions. We'll talk about that too. Look, when we talk about other laws, that's the whole thing. I mean, there's probably even more than that, right? I mean, state laws certainly. We triggered other laws by doing anything unique with 1099s or doing anything that we want to do with loan officers. Or loan comp, even its implications, as you're talking about employment laws, will get triggered with 1099. How do you treat them? Do you really control them? And that, by the way, was the feedback I often got from the states about this. They kept warning there's so many other things. I said, I'm aware. I was just asking on the licensing aspect, because there really is a cascading issue that will come up with 1099s or loan officers on other things as well. No matter what you call it, this legal tentacles will define it their own way. Thoughts, Troy?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And of course, we can't go through all of them today, but I think that there's risk in all of this, and you should be looking at these. Again, we'll send you the slides and go through them and think about them and figure out ways. Know that these particular items are on the CFPB's radar and state regulators' radars also, and then figure out a way to deal with it in your risk management comfort levels and interpretations. By the way, that's Ray's son fencing.
Okay, yeah, you don't have to say anything. That's okay. The guy who's winning, but yeah, whatever. That's all right.
So we are out of time. It's unfortunate, but what do you do? Check your CMS. Everybody has a compliance management system. If you don't, you should. You need one. Engage. You got to make sure that you're working through your systems, working through your compliance management system, and also reviewing what's going on in your companies. Set expectations. Tell your people, what you're willing to tolerate, what you're willing not to tolerate, and then prepare, because the prepared company, when a regulator comes in, almost always does way better than the company.
And to that point, Troy, real quick, the one of the things I've talked about, especially in-house, was a matter of auditing our payroll. It's one thing to have the agreement with the loan officer, and we read that. But sometimes you will have things, and maybe some people here in the call know that you have these competitions where, hey, anyone who brings in a loan today of $400,000 or more gets an extra $100 for the day, something like that, right? So great idea, very innovative, love that. It's illegal, but it's really innovative. And so these are the things that won't necessarily be run through compliance, but you might pick it up in payroll. Now, look, I'm not saying we have to audit payroll. All I'm saying is a state or CFPB might look at payroll and find it. And so that's why I'm saying, do you have to do a full? I don't know. All I'm saying is there are times and instances where you're going to have some of these issues manifest without the control, or possibly without the controls in place. So you have to find it somewhere else, not for a gotcha moment against sales, but because you don't want someone else to know it because you didn't look there. That's just really my point.
Yep. I think we're out of time. Thank you, everybody. These are designed to be quick and to the point, and I hopefully got you some information there. Have any questions, give us a call. And I will, thanks to everyone, and Shauna and Ray, especially you as well.
Right, thank you, guys.
There was a lot of really good questions, so I did mark those down. I know we weren't able to answer them today, but we'll try and get some addressed in our slides when we send those back out to you, ideally tomorrow. So that's the plan. So have a great day, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.